Yo, how's it going everybody? You got Sketch here and welcome back to the channel. On this episode we're going back to the Curian Mansion and yet another remake of SEGA's coveted rail shooter series that we covered last year in hopes that the developer would deliver a better experience for its sequel. We're looking at the House of the Dead 2 remake, developed by MegaPixel Studios and published by Forever Entertainment, releasing to all current and past-gen consoles and PC in August of 2025. The physical version releases on Halloween, and what better time to see what they've cooked up. We're going to be checking out the Switch version here, so before getting much further ahead, let's check out the story. 2 years after the Curian Mansion assignment, we now follow AMS agents James Taylor and Gary Stewart as they investigate occurrences in Italy, as the city is overrun by bioengineered creatures wreaking havoc on the living. Once the agents notice the similarities of the events, the AMS begin to suspect someone from the Curian incident may still be pulling the strings in this new outbreak. Gameplay wise, you've got a 3D on-rail shooter where you'll blast the leftover horrors of the Curian Mansion through 6 stages. You'll have a set amount of hits you can take before losing a life, and enemies will be doing everything possible to separate you from your credits. Going through each stage, you'll battle a boss at the end with a weak point to hit to banish it back to the Shadow Realm. Sounds simple enough, though this remake does make a few changes to the 1998 arcade original, much like the first remake. The remake features some upgrades compared to the 2022 House of the Dead remake by changing the requirement of saving all the hostages to access any of the special weapons, where now you just have to find them during the stage. The numerous amounts of special items you can collect just by playing the game and having sharp enough aim and timing is an improvement compared to the last one. You can find weapons like crossbows, assault rifles, and grenade launchers to name a few, and the grenade launcher is hilarious to use, but if you're trying to save the hostages or want precision aiming, this will simply annihilate everything in its crosshair. Depending on who you save and who you don't, the game will take you down different paths which will have different bonuses and power-ups, and in some cases alter the arena that you fight that stage boss in. You can also find bonus multipliers and additional credits throughout the game, and despite starting with an initial credit cap, you can buy more credits at the cost of exchanging your points. Something that will greatly affect how your run goes is your aiming. You can use the Joy-Cons or controller sans gyroscope controls this time around, but you also have to dial in your settings to make it as functional as the light guns from the 1998 arcade coin-op. The aiming is going to feel delayed at the default setting, and dialing in custom settings will make the game feel better to play, but out of the box, in a game where precision is important, you would expect the controls to be a bit tighter. If you're familiar with the 1998 arcade original, the enemy placement will be mostly the same, despite there being a few instances where your aim just won't feel tight enough. The boss fights are the biggest areas where this will come up. The Y button will recenter your aim, otherwise your crosshairs will stay where you last placed your shot. Let's talk about those boss fights for a moment, since the game will have some similarities to the first entry's remake. The Judgment Type 28 will have its main body and a smaller one that flies around the arena, and in the arcade version is way easier to hit. When you fix your aiming, this is a little less tricky, but there will be times where you'll take damage even though your shots look like they're on. The aiming, even once you dial things in, will often feel inaccurate, but with some of the special weapons like the grenade launcher, you can just use the blast radius to smoke foes quickly and compensate for it. The splash damage will also demolish civilians too, so be careful if you choose to run it in the game without a more accurate secondary. From there, bosses will have their weak points to target, but the aiming will be its own boss battle in itself. The Hierophant encounter is a bit easier to manage, but depending on how fast you can clear this encounter, it will start throwing piranhas at you from the water. The Tower Type 8000 will have 5 Hydra heads to hit before the last one sleeks either underwater or underground, and the hitboxes here are a bit weird, but once you get a feel for dragging the crosshair down from the mouth a bit, your shots will seemingly better connect. The Strength Type 205 is a chase sequence where you shoot the beast in the head, and this has such a large hitbox that it's honestly hard to miss, but it does move quickly. The 5th stage opens up with a gauntlet of the past bosses and brings back the first entry's final boss, the Magician, and the same rules apply as before with hitting the glowing areas in the thigh and arms before scaling the tower to battle Goldman. After battling the Type 8000 again, you'll reach the Emperor Type Alpha, which will take the form of each boss in the game and a few of its own like the orbs that move around the arena. Shoot anything that's purple here and the encounter is over. This battle felt somewhat easier than the rest of the game, but once you hit that last shot, the game's ending rolls, and it looks a bit different compared to the original, but we'll discuss that more shortly. Graphics wise, the House of the Dead 2 remake runs on the Unity engine, and is similar in appearances to the first remake, though they have taken some liberties. While there are no new enemy types, they have remodeled all the enemies and even censored some of the civilians like the kids that were in the arcade original. They appear as adults here in the game, but they still have the original dialogues and their parents are still in the building and things of the sort. Most of the environments are now set at different times of day, which does change the dynamics of visibility for most encounters. It's weird that most of the original takes place during the day, where most of the remake takes place at night, and the reduced visibility and often washed out look of everything is noticeable, and the further in the game you get, the more you notice how details are getting lost in the shuffle. This gets very apparent once you get to the final showdown and Goldman jumps from the high-rise into the blue abyss. The background detail is decent in some places, but then rather bland in others, like the final scene for example. It's also interesting to note that, once again, SEGA had no involvement with the development of this remake, much like the previous one, but still had the same conditions as this was a package deal, so to speak. What's crazy is that the source code wasn't lost this time, but when the demo released, there was a valid concern about the rest of the game since it looked too similar to the first remake. The physics of the game when dispatching enemies has them ragdoll instead of being pumped back or falling to pieces, and there are a lot of lighting issues that have ghosting or moments where the light sources just don't make sense. With the inclusion of bloom and motion blur, this does make the overall imagery look weird, but this can luckily be turned off, making the experience a little bit smoother. While these are turned on, however, it causes screen flicker and at times assets just not rendering in properly on the PC version especially. However, the graphics settings can't be changed at all for the Switch version. It's disappointed that many of the same graphical issues from the first remake were made here once again, so I won't ramble on about the same things again here, since they are the same critiques of things just looking off and less interesting than its chunky arcade graphics from nearly 30 years ago. While the graphics may leave a lot to be desired, the audio is another story entirely. Sound-wise, the House of the Dead 2 remake is a mixed bag to say the least, despite there being marginal improvements from the first game. So let's talk about the good things first. Considering the source code wasn't lost, you have the option of listening to the original soundtrack by Tetsuya Kawauchi or the new soundtrack composed by Sebastian Poncelet. Having the music options is a plus compared to the last time, but the original audio doesn't quite hit the same with the new visuals. The new soundtrack has a similar feel to the original with some new instrumentation, and it's overall decent, though most times will be more focused on the game screaming reload at you and trying not to get smoked. The spoken dialogue is somehow more stilted in the 1998 original, with new voice recordings that don't have the same impact as the original. The voice actors vary with their line delivery, and some gave it a decent effort, while others fall tremendously flat. There's also the younger civilians being displayed as adults despite having the same voice lines as if they were children, which is an odd change. The voice acting was never meant to be high theater, but the so bad it's good sentiment does get lost at times during this remake. Sound effects are another spot where it varies quite a bit, and some effects are decent and some are missing entirely compared to the original. Using the special weapons are where it's most noticeable, with a lot of them not having a firing sound or very quiet ones. Compared to the 1998 original, the difference is noticeable, and it's a step down from the more fleshed out audio that had much more audible feedback in its action. Well, the House of the Dead 2 remake does make some improvements to their first outing in 2022, but sadly, not by much. The term I've heard most associated with both remakes is that of being soulless. This is unfortunately a valid assessment where I would also have to agree. I went into it knowing it might not compare to the original, and lo and behold, that was indeed the case. I get that the developer tried to take this project on and do it right, but it's a bummer that it just doesn't compare to the originals or spin-offs. The physical version releases on Halloween, and I'm curious to see how this will do considering the digital version released so far out in front of the physical. For what's there, you can certainly get a couple runs out of it and try to discover all the hidden items and weapons, but the performance issues and lack of personality from the original is something that just doesn't make it as replayable as it did back in 1998. Tread cautiously if you want to embark on this mission, since even the most die-hard fans of the franchise may pass on this unless it becomes drastically cheaper or gets reworked upon release. The House of the Dead 2 remake, it's a 5.5 out of 10. I only recommend picking this up if you have a curiosity about how good or bad it can possibly be. For $30, there are other light gun and rail shooters that I would recommend before this, despite it making some improvements compared to the first one. While you can totally get some entertainment out of this, you'll constantly compare it to the original, especially if you've played both, and wonder, how did this miss again? This, much like the last remake, should have been a slam dunk, and the fact that both ended up being middle of the road to bad depending on who you ask is not the outcome fans were hoping for. Even if the physical version ships with just as much stuff as the last one, I would still wait for it to become cheaper before buying it. If you want to play a good port of House of the Dead 2, play the Wii double pack that also includes the third game, or if your local arcade has a working original cabinet, go play that for less than the entry of the price of the remake. We'll see if the later games also get a remake in the future, but it may be better received with more oversight from SEGA moving forward. And if you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. If you find these videos helpful, that's awesome. I'm glad you use it as a resource. Check back often. We'll have more reviews and commentaries come up in the near future. But until then, take it easy and stay safe out there. I'll see you on the next one.